Well, what's ratchet menopause?
That's the mamas that be. Naturally, after menopause, your estrogen levels go down naturally. And so for the most part, fibroids will begin to shrink, but sometimes they can also begin to harden and calcify. And depending on the location of the fibroid, sometimes that can be uncomfortable for women, and sometimes that is the solution to everything for them. Their bleeding stops, their fibroid shrinks, the bloating decreases. The only time I get visited by women that are postmenopausal that have fibroids that are bothersome to them is if, one, they begin to bleed again, which is a big no-no after menopause that has to be fully evaluated. I'm not worried about those fibroids. I'm worried about potential cancer. If you stop bleeding and you're fully in menopause, meaning you haven't had a menstrual cycle for greater than 12 months, and you begin to bleed again, the bleeding is worrisome. Or if the fibroid is causing them pain or discomfort, or they still have a big abdomen and they've given it time for shrinkage, then they'll still come in because of the bulk symptoms. But for most part, a lot of people, if they can make it to what I call graceful menopause, their fibroid symptoms will start to reverse and they'll start to see some improvement and it won't be as bothersome for them.
Well, what's ratchet menopause?
That's the mamas that be. They're not doing lifestyle changes. So
in cases where women do have, fibroids that are not reversing during menopause, it's usually because there are other lifestyle factors that are still fueling them big time. Like I'll look in, because I'll say, okay, what was going on this season in your life? Oh, I had a death and this, and then they're like, oh, because I saw it. Always when in our intake, when we go, we will say, we'll be able to pinpoint, oh, this is what was going on in your life and this is why they were growing, right? And can I just say, if you have a doctor who's gonna gloss over like, oh, it's okay, and not, you need a new doctor, okay? Mm-hmm. Like you need someone who is hearing you and listening and going to actually, do tests and refer you to the right specialist to make sure that everything is really being ruled out.
A fibroid by definition is benign. However, there is a subset of cancer called leiomyosarcoma that are not fibroids, but very similar. And they look the same on initial imaging most of the time. And sometimes on MRI, which is the best and most optimal imaging that we can have for gynecological structures, doesn't pick up on it either. However, it's rare, it's extremely rare, but one of the things that can be a sign or symptom of it is that fast growing fibroid in that 40-plus-year-old woman, or 45-plus-year-old woman, or 50-plus-year-old woman, or someone who has gone through menopause and their fibroid is getting, and their uterus is getting larger instead of smaller. Those are all telltale signs for you to go to your doctor immediately and seek some guide, some testing to find out what it is. The unfortunate truth about leiomyosarcoma is it's very difficult to diagnose. It's not until you actually have the pathology in your hand and send it off to a lab that they can confirm that. So if you're over 45, they will recommend that those tests are done. Usually I will get an MRI and an endometrial biopsy for all of those patients for any abnormal bleeding, certainly if their fibroid is growing very, very fast.
What's fast, Dr. Soyini? Because I just something relative.
Fibroids, benign tissue, typically can grow anywhere from 1 centimeter to 1.5 centimeters a year. So if you have a fibroid that's grown 5 centimeters in 1 year, that's pretty fast. That's pretty aggressive. But it could not be cancer. It could be because of stress and all of the things that Coach Gessie has talked about.
Just to touch on perimenopause, one of the major symptoms that we talk about with fibroids is irregular bleeding. And as we make that transition in our life towards menopause and that perimenopausal season in our life, irregular bleeding is part of that because the hormones that stimulate the ovaries to ovulate or the ovaries themselves are starting to function less. And so then you get longer intervals between periods and maybe irregular bleeding in between them or heavier periods as a part of that too. So in women who have fibroids already that maybe weren't causing any issues in that transition, it might be harder to distinguish between both of those.